sorry. For this you driver, first time I've ever met him, so we got a lot of problem. Because I was picking on Jason. And I saw the neighbor religion part of it walking across, trying to get away here. Jason. So she met us in Toronto, and she said, "Oh, how do I know him?" I said, "Practice got about 30 years." And she's like, "Shit." We had a contest when you could get more pictures of him. I got a lot of them. We started 5 minutes ago. You just pass it around. Where you sit? Probably. Close enough I could throw stuff at Jason, but still hard. But, far enough.
Hello. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you need water,
Oh, okay. Hello.
so we'll go, that'll be 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 is on the end. The other end. 1, 2, 3, 4. 3. And 1, 2. Yep.
Mickey,
Check your own mic.
ahí está Mickey. So,
Okay. So there's
Jason, you're a fan?
yeah.
You're a fan?
Good evening, beautiful and beloved people, and welcome to the Metropolitan Community Church of Toronto. Folks who are here in the sanctuary in person, and folks that are tuning in online. Here at MCC Toronto, we seek to be a vibrant, inclusive, and progressive church and a human rights church. And we've got a long history of political action. 21 years ago in January, the world's first same-sex marriages to be legally recognized were performed right there. And we're really proud of that around here. It wasn't just an act of faith for us, it was an act of political activism. And so we are happy to be sharing our space for tonight's Queer Vote Ontario Candidates debate. I was offered concert tickets tonight, and I passed them up because as a trans Ontarian, I believe this stuff is really important. There are parties with ideologies that would make life harder for folks like me, and there are parties with ideologies that would make life better for folks like me. And speaking of folks like me, my name is Reverend Junia Joplin, and I am the associate pastor here at MCC Toronto. There are all gender and accessible washrooms in the hallway out the door to my right, and there are signs, I think, guiding you to a women's washroom downstairs out there too. Two more things before I hand things over to tonight's fabulous moderators. First, the donations that folks have been making tonight for this event are being used to support the work that MCC Toronto does to help LGBTQ+ refugees. Each year, we provide assistance to some 800 queer asylum seekers from all over the world, and we think that's really important work. And so we wanted to give you all a chance to join in that work tonight. And finally, we want to acknowledge with respect the history, spirituality, culture, and territory of the Indigenous peoples who have inhabited this land for many generations. We recognize the lands that we are gathered on tonight are the traditional territories acquired sometimes justly, sometimes unjustly from the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit and the Métis Nation. We also want to recognize the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples on this land today. We believe that we are all called to love our neighbors without exception, and so we seek to heal from the sins of our colonial past through truth and reconciliation. And with that, here we go.
Thank you, Reverend. And to our candidates, Sherwin Modest, Executive Director for Pride Toronto. And I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled to be here to hear what 4 of our political parties have to say around some very important issues for our communities. It is really important that we hear directly from you. And this is why we're here, so I'm really happy that when Jason made the call and said, let us do this, I could not turn down this moment. So thank you very much, and again, this is an opportunity for you to tell us, as Ontarian, as folks from Ontario, I'm not going to try to get it right, what your plans for us. So at this time, I would like to introduce a friend, a colleague, an elder, a spiritual leader for me, Elder Blues, who will do our land acknowledgement and traditional blessing. Elder Blues.
I hope you can see me. I'm not that tall. So I'm not going to go up above anybody, because it's my teachings that we stand amongst each other and not above each other. So I'm very happy to be here tonight, and thank you to this beautiful location that takes care of our community, that looks after those that have been forgotten and those that are still refused spaces and places to be at. So thank you for that to those responsible for maintaining this space, for providing the services that they provide, and to make this space available tonight for us so that we can ask the members of the parties up here, how are they going to represent us? We need to see ourselves reflected and respected throughout all of Toronto. So tonight I'm going to ask those ancestors to come and be with us tonight. All of our ancestors, not just Indigenous ancestors, but all of our ancestors. All those that have walked on this land and tried to be the best person they could be and tried to be who they could be, but were not allowed. They were told that they shouldn't be, they don't belong, and the way of living was not correct. And we know that diversity, our ancestors walked that way. We know that before the idea of the colonial binary came in, that we were allowed to be who we were because we all come as a beautiful gift, whether we believe in the Creator, whether we believe in God, whether we believe in that person who created all of the spaces for us and the land for us. So we come as that beautiful gift. So we ask those ancestors, be with us tonight as we do this hard work. Because it's hard work to voice our voices when we are always told to be quiet. It's hard work that our voices have been silenced for so long. And each one of you that are in this room tonight are your ancestors' dream. You are the ones they dreamt that would make change that they didn't make change with because they weren't allowed to. Their voices were not honored, they were not honored. So we honor them tonight and invite them to be here with us. But not only those ones that are gone into the spirit world, but those that are waiting in that spirit world, waiting to be born. They're watching us. And they're wondering, can I come to this place? Am I going to be safe? Am I going to be included? Am I going to be accepted? Am I going to be honored? Because I'm going to bring my gifts with me. And I'm willing to share them with each and every person. Because as you heard from the Reverend earlier, we all deserve love and respect, right? We all deserve to be treating each other as an equal human being and value each other. No matter what our differences may be, we all deserve love and respect and kindness and compassion. And so we look towards those little ones waiting to come, and we're asking them to come, that spirit to come here with us tonight, and let them see us do this work. Because that's what we're doing this work for, not only for ourselves. We can't change what happened already. It's gone by. But we can make sure it doesn't continue to happen, and we can stand up and support each other in the best way possible. So tonight, I hope we ask these representatives, what are you going to do for us? How are you going to make sure that we get the supports that are needed? How are you going to make sure that not a young person takes their life again because there's not supports, because they're told not to be who they are? Our trans community suffers each and every day being told they're not all of. And that's not right. Where are the supports? Where are the supports for our young trans youth that are not accepted into places because that binary still exists, where we still divide by male and female? What are those like me? In my language, I would start off by saying, Tanseyaski Nikamun, Natisi Nakasun, Mayingandodem, Atathakup, Saskatchewan, Red River, Eskazoni, Nadunjaba, a Yahweh. What I've told you is my name is Earth Song. That is the name I had before I became a human being, that my ancestors and all those waiting to be born knew me by. My families are from Atathakup, Saskatchewan, and Eskazoni First Nation in the Red River. And I'm from the Wolf Clan, but mostly I'm a Yahweh, which is the Cree word for neither man nor woman. I don't have to fit into either of those. I can be who I am and walk between and with and cross over and come back. I don't have to be just a man or a woman. And we don't have to just stay men or women when we don't see ourselves reflected in those mirrors. Our youth are waking up and looking into that mirror each and every day and saying, this doesn't look like me. This doesn't feel like who I see myself. How is healthcare going to help our youth in that way? How is healthcare going to address our youth that are suffering with their mental capacities, not being able to be who they are? To have to wait for a long time to be seen, and then to be seen by someone who has no understanding of the 2S LGBTQIA+ community. How is our healthcare going to be educated? Our school system has started education, but our healthcare is far behind. I've gone into hospitals, and they've said, where are you from? What is your religion? Thank you, miss. And I said, who said I'm miss? Well, it's either miss or Mrs. No, it's not. So that tells me that there's so much more work to be done. And I don't know about all of you, but I'm tired. I'm tired. I've been doing this work for 62 years almost. And there's many that have been doing it for longer than me. But tonight we're going to see where you all stand. And we're going to ask for your truth. As Indigenous people, we stand in truth. It's very important to us, that truth. There's only two things we have in this world, which is our words and our bodies. And we know how much our bodies are not respected and violated. 2S LGBTQIA youth experience violence at such a high rate above everyone else. So we're asking you for your truth tonight and to let us know. And if you don't know, please tell us you don't know. It's okay to say you don't know, because then let us help you to understand what you need to know and what changes need to happen. So we thank those ancestors for coming here to help us speak these hard truths, to be able to ask the hard questions, and to come with kindness and compassion. Yes, we're angry. Yes, we're disappointed. Yes, we're sad. But we have to put those emotions aside and think, what do we need and how can we get it? And let's work under those ways to make sure that our representatives represent us and that our voices are heard and amplified and respected, and then we can move forward in good ways. So thank you to each of you for being here. Thank you for inviting me. I am an outspoken person, but that's why my community has me, because I've learned how to fight back and I've learned how to advocate, and it's my job to teach it to other people, because if I don't, it stays with me and it goes with me. And then what has my life been? So please take whatever words you've heard tonight, try to share them with your communities, share them with the representatives, and most of all, remember that you are a beautiful gift just as you are. You don't have to be anything other than you, and no one should tell you you have to be different. Miigwech, hi. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much. Well, hello, pigeons. How are you? Oh, look at that. Oh, you're way back there. I see you. How are you? Good. My name is Geriatric. It used to be Anita Woody, but they don't let me use that name anymore. You get it later when you think about it on your drive home. Listen, my name is Geriatric. Like I said, I am from the north. We have electricity. We have indoor plumbing. It's really amazing. The world does not stop at the berry. Right, Sean? Right. Anyway, we invited all the parties to participate in this debate. We worked with the leaders. As you know, a couple of them caught COVID, sadly, and weren't sure what they were going to be able to do or whether they're going to be here. So they decided that the best thing to do was send representatives that speak on their behalf. So as you can see, we have these wonderful folks here, all set. But I felt a little bad about the conservatives. Yeah, I did. I felt a little bad. I think they needed a little representation here at the debate. So I went out of my way today. I went to the Arctic. So I thought, let's give Doug a little bit of representation here today. All right. There you go. So Doug is actually here. He is technically at a rally they decided to do 2 days ago, so he could have come, but he doesn't answer the phone for us. Anyway, so I have the pleasure of joining one of the most amazing people I've met and watched over the years. Not too many years, because she's only 21. So I just want to make sure she knows that. You've seen her on TV, you've seen her on the comedy tours, you've seen her everywhere. Martha Chavez.
Hello, how you doing? I am Marta Chavez. I am a comedian. I'm a stand-up comedian. I was born and raised in Nicaragua, and I am just amazed that I am here. You know, how do you say, with the distinguished people here from the government. In my country, the government doesn't even allow you to have rivals. The president, the dictator, he sends people to jail before they even run. So this is amazing for me to be here. The things have been happening in Canada that I don't like. well, besides the COVID, I went to Central America in March, and usually people from my country, they don't know anything about Canada. They just know that in Canada there is snow. And they think that the snow is beautiful and pristine, like in the Christmas cards. They don't know everything that the snow involves. But now when I went, they knew about Canada because of the truckers. My cousin tells me, hey, I heard that there is a revolution in Canada. But what a nice revolution. There is a jacuzzi in the revolution. There is a bouncy castle in the revolution. They were roasting a pig in the revolution, and children are playing hockey in the revolution. What a nice revolution. And you are so oppressed in Canada that people showed up at the presidential palace with huge posters to tell the dictator to go F himself. So that's such a great oppression to be, Like when you are really oppressed, believe me, you wouldn't be there telling that you are oppressed. There was a woman coming out of the pot shop. These are jokes, huh? Coming out of there was a woman coming out of the pot shop, and she's smoking a joint. And the CBC, she was with the convoy, right? And the CBC asked her, why is she protesting? And she goes, because we are so oppressed. Freedom! What she should have been asking should have been free dental care, because she had no teeth. But everybody asks for whatever they want. This has nothing to do with the evening, but my friend here asked me to come and moderate the debate with her. So I am just throwing my political thoughts. But I'm really happy that we have these fine folks here in the interrogation. And I hope that they tell the truth. Because if we are at a church, when you lie at a church, when you lie at the church, you can burn to a crisp. This is not the first time that dog is going to sweat at a church. No. I know he's going to sweat as if he is at the spelling bee. But, so anyway, we will ask some questions. A lot of people sent us questions. And I hope that you fine folks also have questions to ask them, because they are giving us their time. That doesn't happen in my country of origin. They are giving us their time. And they are being smoked now. That's a different meaning in Central America. If somebody smokes you at a meeting, you know what I mean? Anyway, I'm going to stop this already, because I don't think I'm amusing anybody. Do you know why? Because I cannot have a potty mouth. I am a church. But I am really happy. I'm really happy. I always dreamt to be at a church. I am from the Church of Laughter. Thank you very much. And I think Geriatric is going to start with the questions. Thank you.
All right, so we've drawn an order in the back, says as Doug is number 5, just so you know. So each candidate has an opening statement to make. They get 2 minutes for their opening statements, and we will start at the beginning, and they will introduce themselves with their pronouns as well, please.
Thank you so much. My name is Brian Crombie, he, him. I have to tell you, I want to vote for you. You're fantastic. Can you come take my spot? You were great. But the problem is, I apologize, the problem is you talked about love and respect. And in politics today, forget love, just hope for respect. And I don't think respect exists anymore. And that's the problem. I'm here representing the None of the Above party, and that's not a joke. I'm not the comedian, you're the comedian. The None of the Above party actually has a very serious point of view, and that is there's something wrong with our democracy today. And there is no love, and for sure there's no respect. And what we need, all these people and all the people that are putting their names forward for politics are really good people that want to do something better for their society. But the problem is once they get into Parliament or the legislature, they end up doing what the leader or the whip want them to do rather than what they should be wanting to do and what we want them to do. And they end up infighting and becoming partisan and arguing nonstop in a way that, you know, just wouldn't accept of others. And so that the party is all about real democracy. Number one, referendums. Number two, recall. Over 50 countries in this world have referendum and recall, and they work. Direct democracy, people actually getting a booklet in Switzerland, having referendums in the United States, having recalls in the United States. It's been proven if you just threaten a recall, politicians smarten up. And third, and most importantly, I think, is proportional representation. If people actually have a voice in Parliament, in the legislature, they don't need to go and protest against the revolution and start a revolution, because there is a voice. If we had proportional representation, the Green Party would have, in the last federal election, somewhere around 10 seats, rather than the one that they've got. And the PCP, which I disagree with, would have about 30 seats. And so I think some of those people that went to Parliament Hill and protested back in January actually would have had their voice heard in the Parliament, and there would have been less reason to go and object. So think about what we do to improve our democracy. Have one person, one vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the invitation to participate. It's a real honor to be here. My name is Kristen Wong Tam, and I'm here representing the Ontario New Democratic Party. My pronouns are they, them, she, her. Thank you to the organizers and, of course, to all the candidates who've put their names forward. This is a really exciting conversation. I can't tell you how deeply I am honored to have this conversation, which I believe is almost historic, talking about LGBTQ equality in Ontario, especially since over the last 2 years, we've seen a disproportionate number of our community members hurt and harmed through the pandemic, not making it through, and oftentimes disproportionately impacted. So we know that politics does matter and decisions do matter, and we also recognize that it's very difficult to make change. I've chosen to run for the NDP because I believe that we're the party for that change. We have an extraordinary history and track record of LGBT equality and advocacy. I myself am a human rights advocate and have spent a lot of my time actually working towards building equality and acceptance for our community, whether it's funding LGBT youth shelters or providing access and support to equal marriage. I've actually done that work as an advocate. I also came out of the closet when I was 16 years old, and I can tell you I wasn't ready for the big decisions of life, and I wasn't greeted with love and warmth despite the fact that my family loved me. I found myself homeless. I found myself living in a shelter. These are not easy things to admit out in public, but it's important for us to recognize that my story is not so unique. All of those lived experiences now informed what I do, especially through a public legislative lens. And I'm very proud that our party has 12% of our candidates who are from the 2S LGBT community, our party who has been fighting for gender-affirming rights, for equal parenting rights, and the absolute ban of conversion therapy. I look forward to tonight's dialogue. Thank you so much.
Firstly, thank you to Queer Votes for being here and bringing this debate here in this room and elsewhere. Thank you to the MCC for being a haven and a sanctuary for people like myself for well over 25 years. Thank you to the Green Party of Ontario for having confidence in its candidates. Myself, Sean McLaughlin, who is here, we have real bench strength when it comes to LGBT issues. One of the things we're here to discuss today is expanding coverage of and access to gender-affirming healthcare. And there's a tenet in advocacy that there should be nothing about us without us. I'm honored to be a candidate for the Green Party and a trans person with a long history of trans advocacy. And because of that, although Mike Schreiner would have been here and would have been an excellent spokesperson, Mike Schreiner, the Green team, Sean McLaughlin and I had some conversations about the need, the absolute need for trans representation on this stage right now. And if you're in any doubt about the level of commitment that the Green Party of Ontario has to trans issues, I am sitting right here, right now, because they put the money where the mouth is. No empty words, and certainly no tokenism. The T does not stand for tokenism in this party. So I've got a little few seconds. What does the yellow one mean? Oh, okay, thank you. Well, I think I've said my piece, so I'll be talking later on. But I just wanted to say thank you, Sean McLaughlin, who is here, and also a thank you to Mike Schreiner and the rest of my LGBT colleagues, any one of whom could replace me on this stage and speak with passion and clarity and authenticity. So thank you. And thank you also for an amazing introduction. That was very, very moving. I thank you for that.
It is, as Kristen said, an incredible privilege and honor to be here. My name is Paul Seguil. I'm a candidate for the Ontario Liberal Party. My pronouns are he and him. And if you had told me when I first came to Canada about 30 years ago that I'd be sitting on a stage as a queer Asian, queer Filipino, with such amazing community leaders, this type of forum discussing the issues, I would have never believed it. It is truly a privilege and an honor. And for one, I would like perhaps maybe to set the tone for this conversation and just applaud the parties who have put forward such powerful community advocates to bring forward the issues that we care about. Regardless of your partisan stripes, it is incredible that we as a community have come so far, and yet we have so much more that we need to accomplish. I'm proud of the record of the Ontario Liberal Party. We elected the first women, the first lesbian premier, and we have demonstrated our commitment throughout for a long time to LGBTQ issues. For those who don't know me, I hope I'll get the chance to talk through this conversation about my own personal history as a community advocate. But Nikki and Kristen know me. I've been in the community with them, and I've fought shoulder to shoulder with them on things like inclusive education, fighting for trans folks, fighting for marginalized communities, and that's what I will continue to do within my party, within the legislature, in whatever forum, platform that I have. That's what I'm committed to doing, and thank you so much to the organizers for putting this together.
All right, Doug, you're up. Oh, wait, I should do it for him. My friends, who is your friend? Oh, sorry. Anyway, so you just stay there and sweat. It's fine. Climate change. Did anybody mention that to you, Doug? Go ahead, Martha.
Should we start with the questions already? Okay, we have a lot of questions. And I know Doug is not. The other day he said that that I'm not supposed to be partisan, but it's just that the other day he said that he doesn't admit any bigotry from anybody. And then I fear that he was going to be marching at Pride. I don't want that, you know. I feel nobody's going to be at the cottage. Right, Doug? Right, yeah. So the first question. This is somebody sent it. Due to various social and economic factors, the gender and sexually diverse community are disproportionately affected by mental health and addiction. What steps will you take to improve our community's overall mental health and wellness? What would your party do to improve mental health and wellness in the LGBTQ2S community?
A few things. I think I really appreciated the executive director of Pride in your introduction. Thank you for being here. My son is gay, and I thought he was very accepted by his family. And I went to a Pride parade and held up a sign that said, "I'm proud of my gay son." And there's lots of PFLAG people that probably participated in those kinds of marches. I was surprised when he later came to me and cried and said, "Thank you, Dad, for doing that." And I thought that he understood that he was completely accepted. But there was something about actually publicly acknowledging that I was proud of him, even though I thought privately he knew that completely and knew that from his whole family. And so I guess that's number one, is that I think we have to show pride for everybody, whether it's a gay son or anyone else.
Question was is, as a party, what would you do to improve, to create facilities or mental health help?
I completely understand, and I think
Yes.
the first thing and the most important thing is showing pride for everybody. That's the most important thing. And the fact that this gentleman wouldn't march in pride parades, I think is the opposite of showing pride, and obviously negatively impacts everyone's mental health. I think mental health is an issue not just for the gay community. It's a huge issue in the last couple of years. I was in a debate last night where people with autism were complaining about a 17-year wait list. And so therefore, what we need to do more than anything else is fund mental health, fund healthcare equally for everyone, no matter where they come from and what their sexual orientation, what their gender orientation, gender definition, what their mental health issues are. Equal access for everyone is what my party would stand for, because we're direct democracy.
Martha, thank you for that question. It's deeply personal and one that I think is so critically important. When we have 1 out of every 3 trans person contemplating at some point in time suicidal thoughts, we have another epidemic happening in our community. It's happening out in the open. When we have community members that are falling through the cracks because the social safety net doesn't recognize them for who they are, their authentic self, these are things that can be prevented. So I will tell you that the NDP has committed to creating an 2S LGBT inclusion action plan. And what this will do is actually ensure that the lived experiences of our community members are going to inform the changes necessary so that we can stay healthy and safe. And that includes providing adequate supports through healthcare, education, long-term care. So from the beginning of life to the end of life and everything in the middle. It also means that we're going to invest in these services by ensuring that we provide adequate funding for universal, publicly funded mental health support. So therefore, for those who need access to mental health care, especially when it comes to breaking down barriers, but also by building themselves up so that they can stay healthy, that is going to be critically important. The other thing, and I'll just end on this because I think I'm going to run out of time, is talking about what happens in the education system. We have so many kids, especially young kids, that are falling through the cracks because we have publicly funded schools, including the Catholic School Board, that have been allowed to discriminate against LGBT students. So a large number of our reforms need to take place through those institutions. It can't just be individual acts of kindness, which are very important. They are symbolic, but it has to be structural change, and it can't be when it's only convenient. So marching in pride is just the easiest thing. It's the lowest hanging fruit from any premier to do, and it can't just be wearing a t-shirt when it's convenient to wear pink, but it's about standing up for the community when we need it the most, when it's the most convenient, and even when it means that you pay a political price, and that's what the NDP will do. Thank you.
Mike Schreiner has been very clear, and our party has been very clear. Mental health is health. If you've got a broken leg, broken heart, or a broken mind, we must have universal access. As it relates to people within the LGBTQ spectrum, I'm a victim of bad healthcare because when I first came out 25 plus years ago, being trans was a mental illness. I had to go to the gender identity clinic to prove that I was not crazy, to prove that I was not a danger to my children, to prove that I was worthy of respect, and an OHIP card that had the correct identification on it. So yes, I understand this profoundly. It's one of the reasons why I've spent so much energy in advocacy. It's been a matter of personal survival. What is the Green Party of Ontario going to do about it? They've already started. By fierce opposition. By making sure that when we're talking about trans rights, heaven forbid, we actually have a trans person talking about it. Unlike other parties that trot us out like some, on a gurney, some kind of wheelie thing, like some transgender Hannibal Lecter when it's time to raise funds and then put us back in the back where we don't make any waves. Green Party has demonstrated that it walks the talk by putting not just me, but many other people just like me, not in the back room, but right here in the foreground, and saying that we deserve the best of all possible health, and that being authentic is not the same as being crazy. Thank you. Thank you, Paul.
Nikki's passion is sometimes incomparable, so it's really, really difficult to follow her. And it really is a privilege for me to share the stage with her. I really commend her advocacy for many of these things. On the mental health, we know the statistics, and they are ever maddening and ever saddening. And I know how deeply each of us in this community has been impacted. You know, the Liberal Party has committed to a plan to fund a package of benefits for every worker that can be portable that will include mental health benefits. For schools in particular, we will focus dedicated supports for students, including to us LGBTQ students, to get the mental health supports that they need, particularly as it relates to catching up after the COVID pandemic, having to deal with mandatory online learning. But we've also committed to ensuring an education system and an education curriculum that respects who they are, that treats them with dignity and respect, and that they see themselves in that curriculum. Because that's what often leads to these issues down the line, that they don't feel like they belong. And I know I felt that way growing up when I didn't have that same type of curriculum. And so that's what we will continue to do. That's what the Liberal Party did. We introduced an inclusive curriculum. We will reintroduce that. And we will make sure that kids going forward have the supports that they need. We've also committed to gender-affirming care and creating spaces within long-term care facilities that will treat our seniors, including LGBTQ2S seniors, with the dignity that they deserve in their golden years, and that they would receive gender-affirming, culturally diverse care. And that, from end to end, is part of the plan that we've committed to the health, because I agree with Nikki, mental health is health.
Thank you. I think we can agree that you're pretty well all on the same page around mental health. I think the only one that has a real difference is Doug Ford and the Conservatives. I think we saw them make cuts when they were first elected, and now they're investing money that is actually reinvesting money that they cut before. But anyway, I'm very confused by it. But anyway, here's the question that I want you to take a few minutes to debate on. The wait list for mental health is currently 18 months to 2 years. What is your party going to do in the meantime to get those needs met within those folks that are waiting the 18 months? And this is an open floor at this point. So anybody? Doug? So what's your party's going to do in the meantime to fill the gap? It's an open floor, anybody.
Maybe if I can start off, Jerry, and then, you know, we're not going to recover from this pandemic and the backlogs that is created overnight. But we do have a plan in place, and part of that includes the funding commitment to ensure, one, that we address the medical and surgical backlogs, but also bring more healthcare professionals into the sector. Part of that is incentivizing people to go into healthcare, to go into these types of professions that require more people to deliver these services. They can't magically be created overnight, and so what we will do is set up funding for new healthcare professionals to go into the profession, people who come in from other countries who can get accreditized faster in Ontario to be able to deliver these services. These are the different levers that we can pull to create that capacity in our system to address the backlog, which is real and needs to be addressed in a timely fashion.
Okay, but the question is how are we going to do that while we're waiting for the 18 months or to hire all these people? What are we going to do? This is the real hard question for everybody. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is actually a really great question because it's about making sure that we actually act as quickly as possible so we're not sort of setting up goals and plans that go into the future, and being able to track the accountability. So, number one, as it stands, we all recognize that there is not and I think we can all recognize this, is that the mental health care system in Ontario is broken. No previous government, whether it's the Liberals or Conservative, whoever has held power, has ever really tackled the mental health care system in Ontario well, which is why we have this patchwork of loose services, and they don't necessarily work, and it's been chronically underfunded. I would think that one of the first things that we need to do is actually consult with the professionals, especially with the Ontario Mental Health Association, start moving towards mental health and health parity with respect to funding. So therefore, let's put in the investments the same way we put in investments when it comes to physical health, because we all recognize that it's tied to mental health, and we move as fast as possible. I would also argue that, not argue, but I put forward for your consideration is that when it comes to the social determinants of health, the social determinants of health are actually the same when it comes to mental health. Access to housing, good employment, living a life free of discrimination and violence. All of those things lead us to better health and mental health, which means that we would have to tackle it in a more comprehensive way. So we're not just treating one symptom, but we're actually treating the cause. And that is why I think it's important for us to recognize that when it comes to a strategy that tackles mental health and actually really puts the money into mental health care, especially for LGBT youth, especially for trans and non-binary youth, that we do it with them in mind. So we center the investments in the people who need it the most, and we measure to make sure that we get those outcomes, and that includes clearing the wait list. And the New Democratic Party is making a commitment to clearing that wait list, especially for children's mental health, within 6 months.
Helen or Brian, any wrap-up for that? Anything you want to add?
Thank you. I think what you're talking about is...
Sorry, Nikki.
Sorry. I think what you're talking about is priorities. And I think the priorities of the current government are messed up. And there's a bill, I think it's Bill 124, that caps transfers to all of the organizations that fund nurses, fund long-term care, fund mental health, etc., cap all those transfers at 1%. Conservatives say they hate wage and price controls, but effectively what they put in place a couple of years ago was a wage control. And when you can't hire more people, when you can't increase wages, and particularly when inflation is 6%, that's the problem. People are leaving mental health, they're leaving nursing, they're leaving autism care, they're leaving long-term care. And that's the number one thing I would do if elected, and my party would get elected, is get rid of that Bill 124. The second thing I got to tell you is the problem that you're talking about is far wider than what you're talking about. It's not just mental health, and it's not just not mental health for one group. I hate to tell you that. There was a group of 30 people last night yelling about autism. A week ago, I had people complaining about a 17-year wait list for long-term care facilities in Ontario. People that are looking for long-term care aren't going to hang around for 17 years, I'm sorry to say. And you could go through too many sectors of our health society, our health sector, and the same problem exists. And so the bottom line answer is we have been bringing our budgets down. They're still in deficit, but our budget's down on the back of healthcare spending in Ontario. And that's the reality, and we need to change it. And that's the only solution for your problem, is dramatic more increases of funding, and not just for mental health, but for all those other things I mentioned as well.
Just to remind everybody that we treat everybody the same. If Doug Ford or his representative was here, we'd be treating them exactly the same, but they're not, so we get to mock them. I'm just saying. So I would ask Doug Ford at this point, when he capped everybody at 1%, what about your 13% that you took right after your first election? But anyway, go ahead, Nikki.
All right, to come back to this. I, in my past, worked in the health insurance field. And one of the things we did was provide emergency care for people out of the country and also in Canada. The trick to triage, and that is what we're talking about here, triage, is to deal with the things that are killing us fastest first. COVID has affected everybody, and the mental health, the holes in the mental health system that already existed from all three parties. There are decades-old holes that include my time when I was coming out as trans 25 years ago, and it hasn't always been liberal and conservative. That those holes were exposed. We need to treat this as the emergency it is. It requires immediate, urgent, non-discretionary care. This is not if or but. This is a question of stopping people from killing themselves, killing other people, harming themselves, harming other people. There can be no delay for this. The money exists within the health insurance program and the health insurance system to do this. The question is different depending on who gets elected. If we have a minority government, well, then we have a minority, some orange, red, green version of reality. I would suggest to you strongly that the green would be at the head of that list with a moral compass, for heaven's sake, regardless of who's in government. But if it's a minority government, then we'll work with us and we'll provide the practical economic, environmental, and social sustainable solutions that we've always done. But if we get the four-letter word that is Ford in as our next government, then the Green Party is also the correct choice. Because we've demonstrated that we can convince Doug Ford that things are his idea. Remember, he's discovered electric vehicles suddenly after tearing down charging stations. He's discovered that ODSP rates should go up to help people with disabilities like myself stay out of hospital. See, it's not just a compassionate argument, it's a dollars and cents argument. The fact of the matter is that helping people with these terrible wait lists isn't a cost. That's a faulty argument. That won't fly.
Sorry, you have to wrap up, Nick.
I will. It's an investment in people. And the money we spend on helping people in mental health crisis isn't a cost. It helps stop them from hurting themselves and costing our society more. So we can sell that idea regardless of whether it's some kind of coalition, minority government, or indeed the four-letter word to my far left.
Okay, we're going to move on. We have to move on at this question. We have a question from the audience.
You know, I was talking today to a group about how we can educate everyone to the indigenous people of this land. And I think it's no different when it comes to education. When it comes to education, when it comes to the queer community, to the 2S LGBTQIA community, we have to start at kindergarten. And we have to move through to high school. And in high school, I can see that we need to put in a course that is an accredited course that is mandatory and you cannot graduate without it. To realize that the discrimination, the racism, the phobia that exists for our community is rampant still. And as well as post-secondary education, you have to take another course in order to complete your area of study, and it has to be compulsory. Otherwise, it's elective, and nobody wants to learn something they're not interested in. What are your views of how we could implement into education not only Indigenous issues, but the health issues to make our people want to improve health care? We have people out there unemployed right now who are healthcare therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, because there wasn't space for them. What are you going to do to make these things compulsory, mandatory, not just saying, this party did this party did that, and I'm going to do this? But how are you going to make that something that's compulsory, not elective?
Start with...
Kristen?
Yeah, sorry.
You know what? Thank you so much for that question. I have been really struggling with what I'm seeing happening in the education system, especially when it comes to protecting our queer youth and the families that they belong to. It also means about making sure that there's a good work environment for even the queer or trans or non-binary teachers, so there's no repercussion when they want to be their true authentic selves. So the inclusive physical health, sexual health education is really critical, and I don't think it necessarily should be something that you get to opt out of, especially when we're talking about informed consent. It's talking about making sure that kids understand their body autonomy. It's also about making sure that we affirm their identity. We have to go back to the statistics, is that kids who are queer and non-binary and trans are really struggling, especially when they're in school systems that don't affirm them. I live in Toronto. I live in downtown Toronto. I can see the village from my window, but I'm sure not everybody is so fortunate. So I think about the kids in the rural communities, in small towns, and I think about the kids in the Catholic school system, where even having a GSA space is not available. And so I'm really proud of our party's track record in pushing for legislative change, with making sure that we have that program with respect to inclusive physical sexual health education, and it should be in all publicly funded schools. So if you are public school and you're Catholic, you should be taught that as well. And that will also save lives, and it creates a safer environment for all. And it's also critically important, I think it's, we've seen this happen time and time again, is that if we don't fall onto the foundation of the Human Rights Code, which I'm very proud that our party led the fight in the legislature, even when we were the third party back in 2012, to make sure that trans and non-binary people are included in the Human Rights Code. That should be the foundation that builds on everything else. So the Human Rights Code, which now, of course, includes trans and non-binary people. So thank you for your question.
Thank you. Go ahead, Nikki.
Well, I have to push back on one point. I was being part of the movement to include gender identity and gender expression at the federal level for well over 12 years and worked with all parties. And I remember the trans women who were there, and I remember the people who were not there. While some of the parties threw some lip service behind including gender identity at the federal level, the people who did the hard work were the trans people and the one who suffered along the way. So I have to correct my colleague here on that one. What is back to the tremendous point that you brought up, and one that's much more positive than this other discussion. We can't have people going out into the world who don't understand that inclusivity isn't something like, an afterthought. It should be hard-coded into the DNA as we go out into the world. We have doctors who go out there, well-educated in every other respect, but completely ignorant. I mean, there's an old joke in the trans community. I went to a trans person goes to the doctor, and she says, "Oh, I've got a broken arm." And the doctor says, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I know nothing about trans issues." I guess it's a little dark for humor, but the fact is that we can't have so-called well-educated people out there considering themselves well-educated unless they've had a complete education that is inclusive in nature. And I completely agree that has to start at ground zero. The other thing that hasn't been mentioned here is that our education system is a patchwork. Here in Toronto Centre, you're probably going to get a pretty inclusive person, even if you're in the Catholic school system. In Durham, they have tremendous education system. But it seems bizarre to me, and indeed perverse, that truth, to use a word that you brought up, truth is different, and facts are different depending on what education system you're in. That's just flat out wrong. We believe the truth is universal, surely, or at least consistent from one district school board to the next. So I am in complete agreement with what you're saying here, that this must be mandatory, not some liberal arts, airy-fairy thing, afterthought, but hard-coded. You don't get your fancy diploma from a doctor or a lawyer or anybody else until you've figured out the truth of the matter. The second part of this, which I will speak to briefly, is
we need to move on.
About helping our kids understand their own bodies, understanding their own beauty, understanding their own authenticity, and that needs to be baked into our education system, not just so they grow up to be good doctors, but so they grow up to love themselves.
Paul?
I agree completely that education is the foundation of how we build a society. I think that's where it all starts. The people that go on to exercise power and authority in our society are educated in a system that, as you described, Elder, is colonial from the outset and has all of these poisonous lessons that we've carried generations. And we need to start undoing that. And that starts by reforming the education curriculum that we all go through and making sure that we undo and unlearn some of those terrible and poisonous legacies. So in a case specifically, because I believe your question was about ensuring that mental health education is part of the system. I think we're all aligned here that the education system has to be affirming of all genders, of all orientations, of different cultures and different backgrounds. But that is actually part of the thing that we're learning now, that neurodiversity, understanding different people's different abilities, both from a physical but mental perspective, has to be part of the understanding of the spectrum of society that we need to coexist with. And I'm personally committed in that because, and I know equally, my colleagues on the stage are equally passionate and committed to this. And I think that's the lesson that we're learning here, is that what you have before you, at least here on the stage, is a set of progressive candidates that are fighting for the right thing for our communities, but for a better society in Ontario. And I think that is a credit to all of us. But in each riding that we're running in, voters will have a choice as to who is in the best place to take that. And I won't speak for the fight in Toronto Centre. There's people here who are running in that riding. But I know in my riding, I'm in the best position to take that fight, because otherwise it will be another crony of Doug Ford's over there taking over. So that's my commitment to you and to the people in this room, that I will be committed to an affirming and inclusive education on all aspects of the human spectrum of diversity.
Go ahead, Brian.
I think that the sex education program that the prior Liberal government proposed was good. It was put in place by a bunch of experts, and it had gender identity issues, mental health issues, sexual identity issues, reproductive issues, sex protection issues, etc. And I thought it was good and it should be implemented. And the Ford government backtracking on that, I think it was a huge mistake, and I think it should be compulsory in both the separate schools as well as the public schools. So that's number one. Number two, though, is I really worry that your issue is far larger. And again, I'm going to say, 6 years ago as a Liberal, I was out campaigning for Kathleen Wynne. I'm from Mississauga. Mississauga might be different than the perception you had in Toronto. The negative comments that I received at the door about her sexual orientation were astonishing. I have a nightly radio show, and last year I had the opportunity to interview your Reverend here. And I'm not sure if you know her story, and I hope you don't mind me telling a little bit about it. But she was removed from her post as a pastor in a church in my riding in Mississauga Lakeshore because she came out as trans. And the people that I know in your congregation thought you were spectacular, thought you were a fantastic preacher. She was loved in her church, but she was fired because of her gender orientation, because she came out as trans. And that's wrong. And if it was in a job, laws would potentially apply, but the Human Rights Code doesn't apply to religious institutions. Did anyone see what happened to Trudeau? When was it? 2 days ago in Vancouver. There is a hatred in Canada today that I've never seen in my life before, whether it's against Kathleen Wynne, against Reverend Joplin, against Trudeau. And I got to tell you, you said you were from Saskatchewan. I was in North Battleford, Saskatchewan 2 months ago. My company has business in northern Saskatchewan. I met with the chiefs of 2 Indian band councils, one 2 bands and another one 8 bands. And they said, today, we're embarrassed of the Canadian flag, because the only people that fly the Canadian flag are people that are white supremacists. And they have trucks and they have F. Trudeau on their bumper. And that hatred exists in Canada today like it's never done before. And that is the most important thing we need to put a stop to get anywhere close to what you're trying to achieve. We've got to get rid of the hatred in politics and in the politic in Canada. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
I do believe that part of the hatred is because Trudeau was the first prime minister that ever marched at Pride. I do believe that a lot of the right-wing ideas from the United States have come here to Canada. And I do believe that the fact that we had the Orange Man, nothing to do with the NDP, Trump, and he gave permission to racists to come out of the closet, and it's very contagious. Hatred is horribly contagious. And as an LGBTQ, as a lesbian, as a member of this community that would have suffered immensely if I were in the United States or in Nicaragua. I really am afraid of the hatred against us. I really am afraid. Remember when the drag queens were reading to the children in the Glad Day bookstore, and then a pastor came, and the pastor, bye-bye. Okay, and the pastor came to yell that Jesus wouldn't have liked that, which is totally wrong because Jesus wore a dress. So anyway, he said Jesus wouldn't have liked men who wore dresses. But I'm terrified. I have never been afraid in Canada of being discriminated against because of my gender, my orientation, or my ethnicity. But I think that now we have to be concerned about that. And I am wondering, as representatives of your parties, if you have a plan set up in order to educate folks a lot more, so we start either sending the racists, the bigots, to the closet again, or changing their mind. What is your plan? Do you have?
And we'll start with Nikki. So it's not that they all want to have sex with Trudeau.
Oh, yes.
I thought he was really popular. That's what I thought was going on.
That's one of
He
my
is very
jokes,
good looking.
but I didn't want to
He
say
is
it
cute.
in church.
Go ahead, Nick.
Just to be clear, what question am I answering?
The question is, what are your plans?
Sorry?
What are the echo is bad and my accent is strong. So the question is, what are the plans of your respective parties to contrarrest this wave of hatred and bigotry that has invaded Canada? You know, I used to be proud to see the Canadian flag, and now I'm terrified, like you said, when I see it.
So, gracias. How do we do that? You know, I've been involved in trans advocacy for over 25 years. And I've marched, I've got here one of the first marches. I did the first march in 2009, then the first march on Yonge Street in 2013. And we got opportunities to speak, and you were there, remember, yeah? And we got opportunities to speak in public. And what we talked about was not about being trans, although we were out and proud. What we talked about is how we were members of society, how we wanted to contribute, how we wanted to participate, how we wanted to be with our family, how I desperately wanted to go see my children at school in their school plays. Simple things. That communicates more sometimes than shouting and screaming, although I've done my fair share of shouting and screaming. Communicating that we are here, valuable members of society, and that anybody who is a bigot is not just an unpleasant person, but stupid. Because we need everybody in Canada and Ontario and in Toronto working together, not just the people we agree with. That's the way people think to the south of us here. There is such a thing as Canadian values that go right across gender and cultural lines. And it's the idea of fairness, mutual support, the fact that because of the weather, we need each other to survive and thrive. That's a core value. What will we do? Well, we're already doing it in the Green Party. At the risk of harping on about it, I'm here. We're making sure that trans people, equity-seeking candidates, of which I'm only one of many within the Green Party, we're making sure that equity-seeking voices are on the stage. So we don't have to say, oh, they need our help, or they need our help. We can say, we need your help. We can speak about us in ways that are far more compelling and, frankly, more inclusive. Whether we form part of the minority government, which we all hope, led by the Greens, with the participation of red and orange folks in some particular combination, or whether we have the four-letter words that is to our far left. Regardless, people like myself will be there, and that will do.
We have to move on, Nikki. Go ahead, Paul.
So I think there are multiple answers to the question, and some of them are structural that we need to put in place. We need to have foundational guardrails and foundational understandings, rules, or else there is no such thing as a society without any rules. And there are things like human rights, constitutional rights that we need to enforce and make sure are enforced. We have, as Kristen averted to earlier, the Human Rights Code, and that is an important document here in Ontario to ground our understanding of what is acceptable behavior and what is not acceptable. So I'm coming from that lens. I'm a lawyer. I've fought for equality. I've fought for constitutional rights all the way to the Supreme Court for our community to be included in spaces and institutions like higher education. So I know what that means. But I also agree with Nikki that it's not just legislation, it's not just rules. We need to be able to talk to each other across our differences. We need to be able to have forums like this where we discuss ideas without descending into partisan sniping, without descending into character attacks or personal attacks. And I know that sounds really idealistic, but that is actually what we need to keep striving for. Because otherwise, we don't have a society that we can keep working towards. We have silos and bastions of isolation, and that's what leads to division. That's what will lead to more and more of these types of demonstrations. And unfortunately, what we see then will result in other contexts is civil war and unrest. And that's something that I don't want to come to Canada. That is something that I will fight tooth and nail against. And that is why, regardless of what happens in this election, I personally will sit and stand across the aisle and work with anyone who's willing to advance the causes that we all passionately care about. Because that's the kind of Canada, that's the kind of Ontario that I'm committed to.
Thank you. Brian?
I think that the hatred that we've got right now is because partisan politics has become extreme. And you're going to think potentially this is simplistic solution, but I honestly believe that proportional representation is the solution. And let me explain that to you if I could. You don't know what it is, or you do know what it is? Proportional representation, I think, would have a dramatic impact on the Canadian Parliament or the Ontario legislature. So I think that the people that had the trucker occupation, which I disagreed with, but they had a view that wasn't being listened to. And they represented, based on polls, 10 to 15% of the population, and no one was listening to them. If we had proportional representation, Maxime Bernier and his party would have 28 or so seats in Parliament. And they would have realized they're a very small minority. They thought they were this huge majority. And at the same time, the Reform Party, that I think took control of the Conservative Party for a while, only did that because they were concentrated in one area, just like the Bloc Québécois are concentrated in Quebec. If we had proportional representation, the Reform Party would be lower in its concentration historically, and the Bloc Québécois would be lower. It would be equal to one person, one vote. I think that the Conservative Party leadership right now is the best example of what's going wrong, is because we have this one party that is on the center right, and there's study after study that shows when you've got a party that's either on the center right or the center left, what ends up happening is the leaders end up catering to the extreme. And we've got a populist partisan that's probably going to win. The Conservative leadership is going to be the most right-wing person that we've ever had leading a major party in Canada today. Even more right-wing than Ford, I have to tell you. So I think proportional representation is the solution. And my son's going to hate me to say this, but frankly, I think mandatory voting, which Australia has, is another potential solution. Because all these parties, what they do is they go out and identify votes by knocking on votes for one reason only, so they can get them to vote on election day. If you didn't have to identify and get out the vote, you know what you'd have to do at the door? You'd actually have to talk to people and persuade them, because you knew they were going to vote, so you'd actually have to have a conversation. So I think that the reform of the democratic system is the solution to our problems.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just coming back to the issue around hate and what can parties do to prevent hate? As a human rights advocate and someone who's actually fought for marriage equality, that was a decade-long legal battle. And, obviously, Reverend Janice Joplin, for even just highlighting the fact that that first marriage took place here. This was not necessarily something that came to the queer community, the queer and trans community, because out of the kindness of the hearts of the government that they said, we're going to do this. We had to fight for this legislative right. We had to fight to ensure that, gender identity, gender expression was going to be included in the Ontario Human Rights Commission. That was through the Toby's Act in 2012, and it was actually Reverend Sherry DeNovo, who was like the most winning MPP in our party, who helped pass all the legislation, including banning conversion therapy in 2015, and making sure that parents like myself, who's not the birth parent, would be able to put my name on my son's birth certificate without having the humiliating effect of going through adopting him after going through provisions of assistance through birthing. All of those things meant that you needed to have legislative change. And this is where I absolutely agree with you, Paul. Governments cannot delay, they cannot deny that change. But those changes didn't come easy. They came with the fight of the community who rose up and said, we need to have those changes, which is why pride is important, why pride is political. And every single time we've been able to take step forward in the pathway of justice, it has been on the backs of our community members, and also in compelling and forcing government to do the right thing. So hate is not something we just teach away. I know that for a fact, because I've lived a long enough life to know that. Hate is something that we must legislate away, and we make it illegal and we make it criminal. So therefore, we can protect our trans and queer kids at all costs, because they need to know that the law is behind them. Thank you very much.
All right, Pigeon. Just before we take it, we're just going to take a couple of minutes, let everybody get a drink of water and all that, and wet our whistles for a few minutes. I'd just like to point out, thank you, Sherwin, the prides across Ontario came together this time. So there's something happening. Because although we're a protest and everything, we have our drama, so I'm just saying, but this is the first time in my lifetime, and it's the first time I've seen prides come together to do something with Queer Vote. And on that note, we'll take a couple of minutes, let everybody get a drink and go to the bathroom. And we have coffee and stuff in the back. So we'll be right back in a few minutes.
Check, 1, 2, check. Check, 1, 2. Check. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5.
Make sure that I actually do the, get rid of the water.
Yeah, hey, Nikki, I'm so impressed with you.
Thank you very much.
Look, I am at church. I am preaching at church. I gotta say to my brother, who is a preacher, look, I am competition now.
Pardon? Can you wrangle everybody up? Wrangle? Yep. You're very good at it. You want me to yell at them? Yep. All right. Whatever it takes. Yeah. And there's a couple of really good questions we want to get into. Have one and then you have the crowd.
You're also polite with the please start the fight. Can you please start the fight? I want some spicy.
Yeah, like we can really do it.
You know that?
Fine. This is fun. Yeah. My campaign manager told me not to hit anybody. Hard. I love your passion.
happy to be at each other's throats. You're too civilized. Can I take a picture of you?
You know what, I'm going to do a selfie with Doug.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to see how this
He looks like Rob now.
Does it look like Rob? Let me see if I can do this. I don't know if I can do this. Yeah, I don't know if I can make it work. Oh, they're going to take it. Okay, sure.
See what's happening to that face as he's melting?
He looks like Rob.
It looks like Rob now.
Melting. Kind of.
Now I'm just going to send it. But we might as well just get it before it's gone.
Did you get a good muffin?
I will after.
We good?
Test. What's that? Yep. Yeah, just give me a thumbs up. Welcome back, everyone. Before we continue with the debate, I would just like to give some thanks. My name is AJ Adams. My pronouns are he, him. I'm one of the folks who are part of the organizing team for the Queer Vote Ontario Coalition. So Queer Vote Ontario, we are a nonpartisan coalition of 2S LGBTQ organizations across the province, from Ottawa to Toronto, Thunder Bay, North Bay, Kincardine, Windsor, and so on. And we are all working together to get queer issues on the agenda, both for the Ontario election this year, as well as every future federal, provincial, and territorial election. So we are no longer forgotten when it comes to policies from every political party. So on behalf of the Queer Vote Ontario team, I would like to thank our candidates, our moderators, Martha Chavez and Jerry Attrick, everyone here in the audience, and everyone at home. Whether you are participating by listening to this debate, taking the pledge at queervote.ca, or just keeping queer and trans issues and people in mind when you go to the polls on June 2nd, you are working towards creating a province and a country that is more inclusive, welcoming, diverse, and equitable. So thank you, and I turn it back to our wonderful moderators and our wonderful candidates.
Thanks, AJ. All right, we got a tough one for you. This came in, I cannot release their name. They are afraid of repercussions from management because it's been an ongoing thing. So this is going to be about Ontario Corrections. Ontario Corrections has been in crisis for over 40 years. Every government has made cuts, privatized training, and so forth, and services within the prisons in Ontario. They have made so many cuts, there is no rehabilitation programs. Staff assaults are daily, and understaffed, and recruitment is at an all-time low. People are quitting at enormous rates, and they want change. Every time someone speaks up, they are hit with repercussions by their management team. They want to know what you're going to do when elected to end the crisis in corrections in Ontario. That's a tough one. And I think we start with Nikki this time.
Thank you for your questions. I can tell you from friends who've lived and sometimes died in correctional care that the warehousing of people on an institutional basis is an abuse, a profound abuse. And the fact that our correctional facilities are filled with people whose principal crime is being different, addicted, having mental health issues, or being part of a minority that is disproportionate, speaks to the core problems in our society today. Warehousing. You know, it's come to the stage now where correctional facilities, prisons, jails are considered an alternative way of warehousing people. Now, I know this sounds a little odd, but This speaks to our housing crisis in general. Living on the streets, being underhoused, being poor, these lead folks to come outside of the law and then be put into increasingly overcrowded correctional facilities. And I have sympathy for the employees who try their best to be as compassionate as we can be for those in correctional institutions. After all, it's been well said that judge a society based on how it treats its prisoners. Judge a society based on how it treats those people who are most oppressed. And we're in a house of worship here, and the notion of Jesus as a social activist speaks to exactly those points. What do? Well, it's money. And again, we've got to stop thinking about costs and start thinking about this as an investment in human beings. That's the problem. Not just the human beings who are incarcerated, but the human beings who deserve our support, including this person who I feel for cannot identify themselves for fear of repercussions. The problem we have here is that the province is breaking the law in terms of how it's treating prisoners by those in correctional facilities. We have to hold them to account, and perhaps some of my friends who are lawyers on the stage here would have something to say about that. If nothing else, making the government uncomfortable is the job of opposition. And we, the Green Party of Ontario, take that role very, very seriously.
Thank you, Nikki. Paul?
So I agree with a lot of what Nikki had to say in terms of we need to divert a lot of the problems that go through the criminal justice system into other avenues. And we also have committed in our platform funds to enhance diversion programs, mental health court, and other ways to get people out of the criminal justice system and then ultimately out of the prison and jail system. One of the worst things this government did, and if people don't know this, is that the Liberal government established an anti-racism directorate. What this government did was take that anti-racism directorate and shove it in the same ministry that handles jails and prisons. That's what this government's idea of an equitable society is, or what its idea of law and order is that crime equates people of color. So that has to stop. And we need to have a government that actually recognizes, as others on the stage have recognized, that there are social determinants of health and there are social determinants to community safety. I think with this question, though, and I just want to focus a little bit on the questioner, because I think what they're talking about is also labor relations protections, because it is still a workplace. And so for people who are employed by the government to take care of people in prison, they are entitled to a safe workplace, just as like all Ontarians are. And again, this government, as soon as it came to power, reversed everything that the previous Liberal government did in terms of protecting workers and protecting safety, and that's something that we've committed to doing, is reintroducing a lot of those worker safety protections, and I hope that we can continue to work together with public sector unions to enhance those protections for workers like this anonymous person, who unfortunately, I understand their concern about repercussions, and we'll make sure we'll protect whistleblowers in the private and public sector who bring forward these complaints and concerns. We need to do better with our workers here in Ontario.
I think our criminal justice system is broken. I really do. And the statistics that are most worrisome to me, and I don't know them exactly, but the percentage of Indigenous people in our population is this, and the percentage of Indigenous people in our prisons is this. The percentage of African Canadians in our population is this, and the percentage of African Canadians in our prison system is that. And I just can't believe that those statistics actually reflect the percentage of people that are criminals. I think it is that mental health issues, that psychological issues, that housing issues, that addiction issues are being treated by putting people into prison. And I don't believe if I was in front of a judge versus some other people in this audience tonight were in front of a judge, that they would get as lenient treatment as I would get. And that's wrong. And some of the people that I mentioned earlier in North Battleford, Saskatchewan, told me that if I looked like you, Brian, and I had a baseball cap and a hockey jersey on, I would have been fine. But if I was there as an Indigenous person or as an African Canadian, I would have been put in jail. And I think that we have a problem of racism in our criminal justice system that is the bedrock problem and solution to your issue. Because if we actually had Indigenous people and African American, African Canadian people in our prison system at the population that they deserve to be in, equal to the whites in the population that are in the system, our prison population would go down dramatically. Now, we might have to have far better mental health. We might have to have far better addiction issues. We might have to have far better housing, because I do think what often happens is people that have got addiction problems and they're living on the street and we can't deal with a problem, they go to prison. Too often, prison is the solution for dealing with problems rather than being the last resort. And too often, the criminal justice system is the opposite of colorblind, and it should be.
Thank you for that question, and I'm sorry that it feels like it's unsafe for you to speak out, especially in the workplace. No one should feel unsafe, and you certainly should not be left unprotected. And with respect to the physical violence that you may be subjected to, that is absolutely unacceptable. Which is why I think we fall back on some of the, which is why we do need to fall back on laws. We need to fall back on the workplace safety environment. We need to be able to look at how it is that your employer, in this case, by way of extension, that the Ontario government has failed to protect you. And that requires conversation. It requires us. I mean, I don't want to judge that I know the answer, but I want to have a conversation to understand what do you need, so I can center your experience directly into the solution and probably talk to a lot of other co-workers that are there, so that we can actually design that to work for you. And that's important. The other thing I would offer you is that, when it comes to diverting people away from the criminal justice system, that's going to be critical. Right now we have the court system that's backlogged. We have the over-representation of people of color, especially Black and Indigenous people, in the prison system, where we have more people, especially when it comes to Indigenous women. We've got more Indigenous women living in the prison system than we have living outside the prison system. There is something very wrong, and the effects of colonization are there. So the structural inequities that lead to that outcome must be evaluated, and we must act upon it. So absolutely having a Ontario Anti-Racism Secretariat and Directorate is absolutely critical, but the NDP is also committed to creating a 2S LGBTQI directorate, so we can actually then implement our inclusion action plan. So it's about making sure we have the structural change that's necessary, so we be able to address the problems systematically as opposed to individually. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, I have to take exception to that last remark. The fact of the matter is that on the provincial, we have provincial problems, but diversion also happens at the municipal level. And in the past, during COVID, we've seen the City of Toronto become defunded around support mechanisms like park ambassadors, like the Toronto City Police Force. The diversion should happen at the provincial level, but must also happen at the municipal level. And to suggest that, oh, there's nothing you could do about this beforehand is simply untrue.
Would you like to respond?
I'll respond again, if you want. I think it's irrefutable that diversion is the duty of the provincial government and the municipal police force, and that the institutions in place to divert people to adequate mental health care, to drug treatment, to other means of dealing with people who have antisocial behavior is not just a provincial one, it's a municipal one. And my friend to the left here understands that and should be honest about it.
So what's the answer to protecting the officers so they can protect the prisoners who protect society? That's the other question that comes up because of the staff assaults, because inmates are not getting the programming they need to reform or whatever they need, and the mental health and everything else. I'm not talking about the the inappropriate representation within that. That's a whole nother issue again. But what about that officer that can't speak up, or the one that's getting assaulted, or they can't protect the inmate from the other inmate, and then you can't protect society?
Falls absolutely right about this, that this is a workplace health and safety thing, which is genuinely under the provincial auspice. And you spoke very clearly to that, I think. The need for whistleblower protection, the need for adequate supports for both the employees, like the corrections officers, and adequate support for the people who are in correctional facilities so that they don't re-offend, so that they can re-enter society and become more productive. Once again, I hate to harp on these things, but we are talking about something that is not just morally correct, but economically the right thing to do, because having someone go through this revolving door where they get clean and sober in prison or in correctional facility and then come out with no job, no house, no future is we have the same, it's definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So yeah, I think Paul answered that very well.
Anybody else want to add anything? Or
I think it's really important for us to sort of make sure we have conversations with those who are directly impacted. So therefore, we actually design those solutions together. I don't know if it's a matter of, the ratio of staff to perhaps people who are actually in the incarcerated. It's unknown to me, what type of protocol was initiated. And of course, when it comes to all government institutions, there are all sorts of protocols. So I want to make sure that, we have that conversation with this individual. And I would say that, if this is how you're feeling, and this is really quite systemic, is that we need to be able to find a way for you to be able to communicate this safely so that we can be able to address it. At the end of the day, when it comes to systemic solutions and systemic problems, we need to be able to design that solution so therefore it's permanent and it's not just, sort of, one-off, because that doesn't necessarily get to the structural problem that I think I have heard your caller, when the way you phrase that question, is that they're experiencing. So it's not just one person that's experiencing it, perhaps it's something systemic. And that's really worth evaluating, and I would take a more comprehensive approach.
But the problem with the more comprehensive approach you describe, it's like looking at a building that's on fire and saying, how hot are the flames? The building is on fire, you need to put the fire out. And so whether we're talking about whether we've got bad training, we have too many people incarcerated for the wrong reasons, and we have employees who don't feel safe. Right? So, this is, I'm sorry, I think perhaps you've been in politics too long, because we need more consultation, we need more feedback, we need more reviews. We don't. We know what the problem is. There are too many people in jail for the wrong reasons, and the employees in there need our help and support. And the cure for that is not more reviews, not more expensive consultants, but money to support the system so that the people don't come back into the system and cost society as a whole more money. It is not a case of let us study the flames to see how high they go. Let's put the bloody fire out.
Go ahead, Brian.
I think whether diversion is the right word or not, I don't know, but less people in the system, I do think is the solution. And I don't think, and I'm not sure, right, the red analogy about the fire or not. Clearly, if there's a fire, you have to put it out. But sometimes we only think about the immediate problem rather than the flow of oil that's going to that furnace. And maybe you should stop the systematic problem, like the flow of oil, and give it less oxygen, or whatever the right analogy is, I'm not sure. I think the problem is not the funding. And I think if we spend more funding, we'll go the way of the United States, which has got tons more prisons and a lot more people in prison, and that's not the solution. The solution is a complete reform of our criminal justice system that doesn't warehouse a whole bunch of people in prisons that don't deserve to be in prisons. And you're going to not like it because I'm going to go somewhere else, and my son's going to say, Brian, you keep on going to other things. But long-term care is another thing that's exactly the same. Long-term care, what we're doing is we're warehousing our aged in long-term care. And some people will say, you got to put more money into long-term care. The reality is what we got to do is have less people in institutionalized long-term care and have home care. That's the only solution that the baby boom is going to be able to actually have a reasonable senior life, is by personal care workers being funded to the appropriate level so they can stay at home. And too often we go with the quick solution, which is putting more money at a problem, and what you end up doing is actually never addressing the systemic long solution. So the systemic long solution to prisons is getting the Indigenous population in the prisons down, getting the African-Canadian population down, and only people that deserve to be in prisons should be in prisons. And it's the same solution for long-term care. It should be a last resort. People should be funded to stay at home. And I could use a couple of other examples where too often we go for the quick hit, gimmicky solution, short-term solution, rather than going through the long-term systemic solution to the problem.
Brian, I'm in a weird position of agreeing with you on a lot of things, which is strange but pleasant. And I appreciate that this is a collegial group that we have up here, but I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. I think you can accept that the house, to take this metaphor for far too long a walk, that the house is on fire and we should shut off the fuel that's providing the fire. They are not mutually exclusive, but we have to recognize that people are dying in prison, that correctional officers are having breakdowns and eventually leaving the system because the working conditions are too poor right now. And so it's not gimmicky to want to fix this right now, immediately to solve the symptoms of the problem, nor is it does it exclude the idea of fixing the systemic issues, which is what I described before, the fact that there are people going into the system that are not being diverted out of it by virtue of perhaps having poverty, mental health issues, or being somehow different in some way, like having fed trans. Literally, you could be put in prison for being trans not too long ago, not too far away from where we are right now. And God forbid that happens. I mean, we're in Toronto Centre, Toronto the good. God forbid this should happen to you somewhere a little, in a different, slightly different area code, because the level of treatment you're going to get is vastly different. I can tell you, I've been pulled over for DWT, driving while trans, in other parts of Ontario, and it is a terrifying, it's funny, but it is a terrifying experience to be put in a locked room by people who have absolute control over whether you go into a men's prison or into a woman's prison. And I can tell you that I consider myself very courageous, but I have rarely been more frightened in my life than when I was held temporarily in custody for DWT. So the two are not mutually exclusive. It is not gimme to want to make sure that people who are in prison, maybe shouldn't be in prison right now, should get out. That the employees should be dealt with fairly right now. And also make sure that we do the other longer term, smart, environmentally sustainable, socially sustainable, economically sustainable things that are good for society as a whole and good for all of the people here and perhaps watching elsewhere, including our friend who I hope is still watching and sending good vibes out to you there. You've got someone who is, well, sending good vibes to you.
Sherwin.
As well as passionate on your behalf.
Go ahead, Sherwin.
Sorry, because I know we're tight for time, I want to change the subject a little bit, because I promised some queer seniors that I would not leave here without asking this question. Because we can talk seniors, but when it comes to queer seniors, what are your plans? Prior to joining Pride Toronto, I worked at Vibrant Healthcare Alliance as the director for community health, and I saw firsthand how seniors are being treated. At the end of the day, many of us are able to buy that extra coffee at Tim Hortons. Our seniors are living on very minimal. So that's for regular seniors. Imagine if you're a queer senior. We can talk about nursing homes. What are we going to do to address the lack of training and the lack of supports for our queer seniors as they look towards retirement home and all of those pieces? So your plan on that. And last but not least, I know there is at least 2 or 3 other prides here. Okay? Pride Toronto is an economic driver for the province of Ontario. My colleague in Quebec is getting 120% more from the province of Quebec than we are getting from the province of Ontario. My colleague in New York is getting 163% more from the state of New York than the city of Toronto. Than Pride Toronto. However, we bring in a lot more. So 2 things, your plans for seniors and how you plan to fund not just Pride Toronto, but all the other prides, the over 30 prides in the province of Ontario.
Long-term care seniors first, and then we'll tackle the pride, and then we'll wrap up. So we'll start with Paul.
Sure. So I'll give you some pretty direct answers because we are running a bit late, but just pretty direct answers on the long-term care issue and the seniors issue. So 1, we've committed as a party to end for-profit long-term care, right? So profiting off of seniors has to stop. Not everyone wants to go into long-term care.
Nobody wants to go to long-term care.
But that may well be an option for some people, right? Some people, like long-term care can be defined in different ways. It could be supportive housing and communities of care, right? So, but some people want to stay in the home that they have built, the home that they've stayed in, and their home that they've raised their families in. And we need to build a parallel home care system, and we need to increase the funding to do that. To the point, though, about queer seniors and seniors from marginalized communities, we need to ensure that the people delivering that care are receiving the appropriate training, and that is a condition of them being licensed to deliver that care. That is part of the commitment that we have in our platform, is that long-term care and home care will be delivered gender-affirming, culturally affirming, in ways that respect the dignity of the seniors, who ultimately is what the care is for. And then the other point, which is something that you raised as well, we've committed to topping up the old age security top-ups that the province pays for, so that on average, seniors in Ontario will get $1,000 more. That's part of our commitment to the seniors community, and in particular, those within our 2S LGBTQ communities that will benefit from those overall commitments.
Go ahead, Brian.
I think this has been the biggest tragedy, and queer seniors are undoubtedly a problem. All seniors are an issue. It's been the biggest tragedy in the last 2 years, is how we have treated seniors in long-term care. And the mortality, you know, the statistic I think is 78% of all the people that died during COVID were in long-term care facilities. And it is a unbelievable, not embarrassment, but tragedy, and it's I think at the foot of the current provincial government, just no question about it. We have been warehousing people in institutions that they don't want to be in. And the solution is not more long-term care. We have a baby boom that is entering the seniors' years, if not already in it, and we cannot build enough seniors' homes to house them. It is absolutely impossible. And then in 10 years, half of them are going to be empty. So it's stupid to do that. It's just absolutely stupid. The only solution is personal care workers and at home. And this Bill 124 that capped the funding to personal care workers and home care at 1% was part of the problem. And you saw Doug Ford gave them a couple $100 million just a week before the election as a potential way to keep them quiet from complaining during the election. So the number one solution to your problem is that we have to fund adequately home care with the type of care that we need. I think the other thing that I have to tell you, though, and again, this is a systemic problem, is we are the first generation in history that have spent more on people my age and older than we do on people 30 and under. And that is a real problem. So we are spending a lot of money on seniors. We're not spending enough money on youth. And that, you know, think about that. The first generation in history that is overfunding on seniors. And I'm a senior, and so therefore I'm one of those people that is benefiting that funding. That is, I think, a significant problem. And I think the last issue is that what we have in Ontario and in Canada is a system where we have lengthened people's lives dramatically with pharmaceuticals. A lot of seniors don't take their pharmaceuticals because they can't afford them. And that is another tragedy. Pharmacare that the federal government is talking about may be a solution. And as you probably know, lots of seniors end up going to hospitals to get the pharmaceuticals that they get for free at the hospital in the emergency room that they can't afford to pay for at the pharmacy.
We've got to move on.
So that's another solution to the problem.
Thank you very much for that question, and I think it's critically, very, very important. The Ontario New Democratic Party is making a commitment specifically to build 50,000 new long-term care beds. And as much as we don't necessarily want more institutions or more facilities, we're going to need them. One of the fastest growing segments of our population are the seniors. And for many families, they just don't have the ability to take care of their aging relatives despite how much care that they love them. So we're also committed to taking out the profit of long-term care facilities that has been, unfortunately, Doug Ford and previous governments have actually opened that door for for-profit, privatized long-term care facilities. And it's actually led to a decline in the quality of care. I think we can all see that, especially during COVID. There was the greatest casualties, over 4,000 deaths among seniors. We basically rode out the COVID pandemic based on the backs of seniors that we've lost. So that is about making sure that the system works. The other thing is the party is committed to hiring 10,000 PSWs. So these are personal support workers who will actually invest in people so that they can stay housed. Not everybody needs long-term care facilities right away, but we need to be able to help people live independently so that they can stay housed for as long as possible. And that includes also the hiring of 30,000 registered nurses. We're talking about revolutionizing the entire sector so that we can take care of our seniors properly, but also plan for the changes in the future. To the point around Pride, Sherman, I can't tell you how excited I am that, number one, Pride is back this year, bigger and better than ever before, and especially the program that I've seen. I was at your launch. It's going to be spectacular with the event of Black Global Pride, and it's woefully shameful that the provincial government hasn't been more supportive, not just of Toronto Pride, but all prides. If we're going to pull ourselves out of the pandemic, it's going to be led with arts and culture, which is a sector that's been hit particularly hard. And we know that prides, all prides, from city to urban areas, city to rural areas, actually save lives. That oftentimes is that place where communities gather. So our commitment is to actually fund the culture program in the city, in the province. It's to make sure that those investments flow as quickly as possible. For every dollar spent, we get multiple dollars return. It's a very solid investment in the Pride community and all the organizers.
We're going to come back to this question.
That work by volunteer. Oh, okay. You want to?
Yeah,
Oh, I see. Okay.
It's okay. No problem.
I'm sorry I rushed that answer, but I can
It's
give you
okay.
the second half later.
Go ahead, Nikki.
No double dipping. Okay, this is a big series of questions. Let me say a little plug for my website, nikkyward.ca. There are some links there through to a seniors debate that we did on provincial issues a few weeks ago, about a week or so ago. In it, we talked about specific green plans for aging in place, personal support workers, and what our plans are for that. Talking about LGBTQ folks, let me first say that I'm very well preserved, but I am now technically a senior. I would joke that it's because my heart is pure that I look so good, but I won't, because it's a tough room. I can tell you, Martha, it's a tough room. Look, I am also a past and executive in the insurance industry, where we dealt with the costs associated with providing insurance products and the mathematics behind this, the actuarial science behind this, and there is science. I am also was honored to build the Canadian Association of Retired Persons Health Insurance Program, the whole benefits plan. Not just design the brochure, but design the maths. That's not bragging, it's to say that when I talk about economic sustainability, I do know what I'm talking about here. I am also a proud former director of the Senior Pride Network. And here we get down to the brass tacks. 6 years ago, while I was doing that, we went to the former government and we said, this is a system that has been broken by several governments of all stripes. And that the issue is not whether it's public or private. The issue is that long-term care causes people who are older and members of our community to go back into the closet and hide their authenticity for fear of not being treated correctly. Because the problem is not bad education, although that's a big part of it, Paul. The problem is an almost complete lack of regulation and enforcement. And so in my work as the Senior Pride Network, we identified public and private facilities that consistently broke the rules, that consistently mistreated LGBTQ folk, and weren't punished for it. So the lack of regulation of this system and the lack of enforcement didn't just make life terrible for people who are members of the LGBTQ community, but directly contributed to the deaths that we saw in the past 2 years. That which is predictable is preventable. And the deaths that we've seen, not all of them, but many of them were preventable. And they have come about as a direct result of not just this government's inaction. Let's face it, this person over here, the icy person over there, has got some blood on his hands. But the truth is that this is a legacy from other governments flip-flopping backwards and forwards and trading blows and trading money between their most favored providers.
Okay, we're going to try to wrap up the last question.
Better regulation and better enforcement. Whether it's public or private, that's a discussion for another day.
Excellent. Sherman, do you just want to repeat the questions about the prides? There's actually 52.
Change, we love change, but oh God, give us the ones that fall. And the bigger the bills, the better. We give enough.
Actually, I realize I'm speaking out of turn. Kristen was talking about this before, and I'll give her a chance to finish her ideas there if there are other ones to roll out.
That's very generous of you, Nikki. Yeah, and Sherman, again, back to the issue about Pride funding. You know, you and I have a long history, and, you know, interestingly enough, I actually worked with Doug Ford at City Council many years ago, and I saw what a Ford government can do, especially when it comes to the LGBT community. It's not raising the flag was symbolic, and not, you know, marching in the Pride Parade was symbolic, but, you know, there was a deliberate attempt to defund and to reduce the funding of Pride, and specifically Pride Toronto. So I was able to successfully fight that on the floor of City Council, not 1 year, but literally 4 years in a row that had to be done. One thing I would offer you is that, you know, the New Democratic Party, we've got 12% of our candidates belonging to the Rainbow family. And I know that every single one of them are coming from diverse communities across Ontario. This is a big issue for our caucus. We will be fighting to make sure that the funding will be flowing, but also we're going to do it through two strategies. One is the new Ontario culture strategy that we plan to create. So therefore we look at prides for what they are, which is the economic driver of tourism, for job and retail, and also the incubation of Canadian music and artistic talent. That, to me, is a smart investment, and it will cost very little compared to what the big global dollars will be. So I know that you will have the support of a very strong 12% of the caucus. You know, it's over 10%, but, you know, we will be fighting for that. The other thing, of course, is coming back to the inclusion plan. So the inclusion action plan that takes a look at all the different streams and making sure that we put an LGBT inclusion lens over everything. Of course, education, absolutely healthcare, we talked about that, and long-term care, but also culture, and also making sure that we are going to fund, resource, and those LGBT-specific organizations, which includes Pride, to make sure that they can deliver the service in the ground, in the community, so where people will be able to access them. Thank you.
All right, we'll do it a little out of order. Go ahead, Brian.
I'm going to be completely frank with you and tell you that the only solution to your problem is to have this man be unelected. And the issue is that the NDP and the Liberals are fighting each other, I think right now, for second place, rather than what they should be doing is getting together to fight to destroy this man. Kristen is excellent. She has been a fantastic city councillor. I would love it if the Green and other candidates in that riding would say the best way to beat the Tories is to vote for Kristen. And similarly, Paul is an excellent...
That's an objectionable statement. That is an objection. We are both running in the same riding here. That's an objectionable statement. You have to stop right now and retract those remarks.
Paul is an excellent candidate, and I would love it if the NDP in that riding would say the best way to beat the Associate Minister of Transportation that's a Tory is for everyone to vote for a Liberal. And the reality is, as long as these three people fight up on stage, you're going to end up with a Ford government. When these three parties start figuring out strategic voting and say the right person in one riding is this person, the right person in that riding is another person, because my solution of proportional representation, regrettably, is not going to be here on June the 2nd. And see, the only way that you're going to get the funding you want, because we all know, and Kristen effectively said it, this man is uncomfortable with funding Pride. He's uncomfortable with walking in Pride. He's uncomfortable, and whether it's him personally or whether it's his base, he's catering to that and his base, and so it's not going to happen. So the only way you're going to get the funding you want is if somehow these guys cooperate and stop fighting with each other and not stealing votes from each other and not splitting the votes from each other, and so therefore the Conservatives win. How did the Conservatives win last time? Split votes. And you know it, and I know it, but they won't admit it because they all want to be the leader of the official opposition. They're running for second place. And right now, that's what the polls are saying. And who knows? Is it going to be Dil Duca or is it going to be Andrew Horvath? We don't know. But the reality is, if some of them would start saying, you know what, these few ridings actually vote NDP, and in those few ridings actually vote Liberal, that would solve your problem.
I can see, Nikki, you're itching there to respond.
You know, it would be, your words would carry a lot more weight if you knew what the hell you were talking about, okay? In Toronto Centre, we do not have a strategic situation. In others, we do. And we also generally have a pretty collegial way of doing things, and we also understand Pride Toronto, perhaps a little better than somebody not of that community. You talk about proportional representation. Proportional representation begins with who you put on these stages and how you respect the people on these stages. I may disagree strongly with Kristen on many things, but I respect her as a politician. I disagree with Paul on one or two things, not too many, I must admit, but I respect him. And I dislike your remarks because you are talking here about proportional representation, making sure that all voices are heard equally and that everybody gets a chance to speak. Hopefully at a later stage, we're also talking about proportional representation, which I also agree with you upon, in the general election. This is way off base with the original question. In 2010, Pride Toronto was nearly defunded in its entirety by the City of Toronto. The community got together to write a plan called the Community Advisory Panel. I should actually say, we wrote a several hundred-page report, consulted with thousands of people in the community to see what Pride meant, why it was so important, and physically identified the economic benefits that you're describing. To say it's somewhere in the back of the Pride offices, it is talking specifically to the issues that you're describing and the lack of funding that's provided from all three levels of government. Now, at the risk of being confrontational, God forbid, you might well look in your history books to find out why we got in that position. You are right in saying that demonizing the opposition and forward bashing is just not the way to go. And that is something our party has not done. We're very good at working across party lines. Things get a little hot under the collar when we're talking about these things, but the Green Party is the only party, I don't know if you saw the provincial debate, is the only party that kept on holding the government to account and did not engage in the sniping that you're describing. So to describe that is it's just not fair or accurate. Back to the all-important issue. I will tell you that there are good things ahead. Pride Toronto is an economic engine, and Doug Ford understands economics. He may not understand the LGBT community, but he understands money. And whether we're talking about a minority government with folks like myself ensuring that you receive funding, or the four-letter word government, you can be sure that on the provincial side, I think there are good times ahead. On the federal side, you're in good shape because our friends the Liberals have got a very good thing going with Heritage Canada and the tourism industry. I think also you'll see some improvement on the municipal side in the not-too-distant future, because part of the problem we find ourselves in right now is the enmity between Ford and the LGBT community, which is a legacy that is about to change for one way or another.
We'll come back to Brian. Go ahead, Paul.
Thanks, Sherry. So I know there are a lot of Pride organizations watching online because this is an important initiative that you have all come together. And I want to thank all of the organizations for coming together. As Jerry said, it's kind of weird and strange when all of these organizations are singing from the same songbook, but it is great when they are. And so we are committed, of course, to increasing the funding to the 2S LGBTQ sector. We've committed $20 million to the sector, social and community services, including Pride festivals. But in addition to that, because we know Pride festivals are not just put on by Pride organizations, they're put on by communities, small businesses, and so there are other pockets of funding that there will be accessible, like tourism, arts and culture funding. We've also committed to supporting small businesses, including 2S LGBTQ businesses, in the form of corporate tax relief for the next 2 years. So all of those things combined, I think will enrich the ability of both Pride organizations, in the case of Pride Toronto, but in some other cities, it's BIAs that put on Pride. In some other cities, it's community centers that put on Pride. And so each of those different types of organizations, each of those different type of collectives will be able to take advantage of the funding. And I can tell you, I mean, I don't have to tell you my bona fides, but for those who don't know, like serving on the board of Pride, I've served on the board of the 519, you're gonna have a champion. If you elect me, at least in Willowdale, whatever the fight may be in other ridings, in Willowdale, you will have a champion who will be on the side of 2S LGBTQ organizations, because I know how important they are, not just to the economic health, but to the health, period, of this province.
I think it's also important, I'll just point this out, North Bay, last year during COVID, during the Pride, sold out 5 hotels. If that tells you anything about economic impact of small communities too. And I think it's really important to really stress that these small prides need support, like Pembroke, Timmins, Thunder Bay, all the ones we would never think of. Anyway, Pigeon, we just got to have a wrap up. So I'm sure we could go on. Oh, I hope you're apologizing, but go ahead.
I'm going to do something politicians rarely do, and I'm going to backtrack my comments somewhat. I didn't realize that the two of you were in the same riding, and so I want to apologize for my comment. And in reality, I think I know your riding, and probably, even if you split the vote, the Conservative's not going to win. And so therefore, my point that I was making wasn't relative to your riding. I apologize. I do think it's relevant for Paul's riding, where a vote for the NDP or the Green might be a vote away from the Liberal that's got probably the second best, the best chance to beat the Conservative. And so therefore, strategic voting is thinking about where the Conservative is in first or second place, and strategic voting could change the result. And I think that's the solution. So I apologize. I did not realize the two of you in the same, and I think you're both great candidates, and I hope people look at your programs and your policies and decide who's the better candidate in the end.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's very gracious of you to say, and of course I accept the generous apology. Thank you for that.
All right, we are going to do a wrap up now. Otherwise, we're going to be here until tomorrow.
It was my fault that I asked them to be at each other's throat. I wanted to see some fire here. I wanted, Central American kind of picante. And then they had a discussion. But we thank you very much for being here. And thank you, Geriatric, for giving me the privilege to witness all of this. And everybody go vote now. Everybody go vote, except the kids. You can still vote. But I mean, everybody go vote. That's all.
Okay, so there's 2 things we're going to do. The wrap-up speeches, they all have 2 minutes to wrap up. It's the reverse orders, and then we have to send our ancestors home. So go ahead, Paul.
So thank you again for everyone, your patience, everyone watching online, streaming, but also everyone sitting here in the room. It's been a long night, got heated, but I can see why. There's passion here for the issues that our community cares about, and that's ultimately what this debate and discussion has been about. I would be remiss, of course. I have a colleague who's running in the same riding as you two. He also identifies from the queer community, so I want to just say, in Toronto Centre, you have a great opportunity to select a champion from our community. We have a diverse Liberal caucus and a caucus that is committed to advancing these issues. And I personally am taking on myself to be one of those champions because I know how important this is. I've spent my entire career fighting for inclusion, fighting for spaces for our community to succeed. And not just the traditional things that we would do, but all the ways in spaces where we would never be seen or would never feel like we belong. Politics is one of them, and I hope that you will choose this election to send more queer people, and in my case, queer person of color, the first queer Filipino to Queen's Park. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you for the organizers. I hope you all have a good night. Miigwech to our elder for being here.
Thank you, Paul. And I worked with Paul as a director in the 519 as well. Great guy, no doubt about it. Firstly, thank you to all of the prides for coming together. And I'm just going to note that for my candidate friends and others out there, that the Greens are committed, and I'm just going to say it out loud. I commit to advancing the three key priorities within the legislature and the government of Ontario. Creating a provincial secretariat and an action plan. Expanding coverage of and access to gender-affirming healthcare, and creating a $25 million annual funding program for LGBTQ services. I'd also like to reiterate that the Green Party of Ontario might genuinely wanted to be here. There is a video that I'm going to try and get, and I'll post it online, where he sends, felicitations and greetings. This isn't just, tokenism. This isn't just, trotting somebody out once in a while for the funding. This is the real deal. What you see with Mike is what you get, which is a committed, authentic person and an authentic party that believes that proportional representation, to go back to your very excellent points, proportional representations means the proportion of folks like me on this stage. If you really, really want to make a point about inclusion, there has never been a trans MPP. There has never been a trans MP. And if you really want to make Ford sit up and pay attention, I'm going to put in a plug and say, you can guarantee, I've already done it with him and his brother when they were at City Hall. I welcome the opportunity to do it at Queen's Park. Please, if you can, vote your conscience, vote your choice, vote for the government you want. Yes, strategic voting comes in somewhere, but not in our writing. But vote for the government you want. That's the only way you're going to get the government you deserve. I'm Nikki Ward. I'm running for the Green Party of Ontario, and I'm proud to do so in Toronto Centre. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you very much to the organizers for this evening's lively discussion. It was the one, actually, to be quite honest, I was looking most forward to, because it's our community dialogue. I'm very proud to be running for the Ontario NDP, and in particular our leader, Andrea Horvat. She is such a spirited human rights advocate. She has never, ever wavered from supporting the 2S LGBT community. In fact, our party has led the way in the legislature in Ontario when it comes to LGBT rights. And I just had to pull out this piece of paper because they gave me some things to talk about, and I want to just highlight it because we've actually passed more legislation through private members' bill when it comes to queer equality than any other party in the history of Ontario. And that includes entrenching transgender, gender diverse rights and the Human Rights Code in 2012, banning conversion therapy in 2015, equal parenting rights, which I spoke about briefly in 2016, creating opportunities for GSA, Gay Street Alliances, in all the schools, as well as creating the Gender Affirming Healthcare Advocacy Committee Act. All of those things came about because of a strong NDP caucus. Right now, we have 40 seats in Ontario. If you really want to send Mr. Doug Ford packing from the Premier's office, the NDP needs 10 more seats. And we just happen to have 15 extraordinary LGBT advocates running for our party. You elect those 15 queer and trans diverse representatives from the NDP caucus, and we will form a minority government. We will work with everyone across the political spectrum to make sure we can build the Ontario that we deserve, one that's inclusive, one that's equitable, one that's fair, and one that protects queer teens, trans teens, protects queer seniors, transgender seniors, so they never have to go back into the closet. And that is our commitment to you. Please visit us at ontariondp.ca. And thank you very much to the organizers, to our marvelous hosts. It's been a fantastic evening. Thank you.
Justin Trudeau, 2 election cycles ago, said 1,500 times in the campaign that this would be the last election under first past the post. And then once he got elected, he broke that promise. Dalton McGuinty put forward a referendum on a different electoral system, and then after it was put to a referendum, he campaigned against it. People, I think, really understand that some of the things that I've been talking about really are the solution to our democratic deficit, our voter apathy. Voter turnout is down less than 60%. Some people think voter turnout this election might be the lowest it's ever been. Voter turnout for people under the age of 30 is like 20%. It's 80% for people my age and older, but 20% for young people, because they don't care, because they don't see that their voice is being heard. So we've got to make a change. And you know, the none of the above party, I've got news for you, is not going to get elected government this time. It's just not going to get elected. But if you actually know some people in Mississauga Lakeshore and could ask them to vote for me such that I can actually increase my voice a little bit, that would actually really help to put this back on the agenda. I got to tell you that I've interviewed Diane Sachs, the former environmental commissioner for the province of Ontario, who was fired by Doug Ford and is running for the Green Party. I've interviewed Abhijit Mani, who's also a deputy leader of the Green Party. There are some incredibly good Green Party candidates. I've interviewed 4 different Liberal candidates, unbelievably good Liberal candidates in some ridings. I've interviewed some NDP candidates, very good NDP candidates. I've actually interviewed some Conservative candidates, very good Conservative candidates in some area. The secret, therefore, the point that I'm trying to say is, learn who the people are, and if you believe that you got to get rid of Ford, then do strategically vote when it's appropriate. But most importantly, vote not for the leader, not for the brand of the party. Vote for the person that you actually think will go to Queen's Park and actually represent you. Because that's what representative politics is really what it's all about. So let's think about actually improving our democracy so that my kids aren't just one of the 20%, but are one of the 60% of the people that vote in the next election. Thank you very much for listening to me. And thank you, Mrs. Doubtfire, for inviting me to this stage. I got to tell you, what Mrs. Doubtfire talked about more than anything else was pigeons. Let's love each other. And so I think that's the key. Your point. More love, more respect. Thank you.
First of all, Martha, thank you so much for coming and spending the evening with me. We're doing this again sometime. Thank you, everybody, for stepping forward and filling in for the leaders and stuff. And thank you, Doug. You look like you lost a little bit of weight. It's cooling off the room. There's a few things I'm just going to say. We're not going to tell you who to vote for as prides. We just want you to go out and vote. That's all we're asking you to do. Go out, make your vote, do what you think is right. That's all we're asking. And let me tell you something to all the leaders. You're not going to keep getting away from all these old debates where the voices aren't heard. As you can see, you had a lot of pressure to make this one. Justin, Jagmeet, I don't know who the heck's going to be running the Conservatives, but God help them. But just be aware, we're here, and we're going to keep doing this, and we're going to start calling on you even more. So be aware. Queer Vote with AJ, thank you very much for all the work you've done. Thank you for everybody, all the prides that stepped up. Thank you for MCC stepping up. You are amazing and welcoming. And Sherwin, thank you for your support, because you were the first one to answer my call when I called you. So that really means a lot. And now I get to turn it over so we can send the ancestors home.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone who spoke tonight, the questions, the answers, and hopefully moving forward in a good way with each other to create that change that's needed. Because I heard all the same words go across the stage. It's good if we can come together collectively to amplify those voices, no matter which party you're with. So thank you for that. We called in the ancestors when we began to help us do this work in a good way, to come and be here with us to see what we're doing and what we will do to make this a safer space to those that are yet to come and those that are still here. So we give thanks for them tonight for being here to help us do this work. Political debates usually get heated, but I must say this was a very small fire tonight. So thank you for that. As we move forward and we continue along with our journey for the next days, the next weeks, the next months, the next years, hopefully for a long time, remember that as we come together, we can only be as strong when we come together. When we think we're so different, we stay apart. When we take the time to sit with each other and to find out what's important and to care for one another, we come closer. So it's going to take all of us to ignite what the people of this territory, the Anishinaabes, believe is the 8th fire prophecies, a time when all nations, like our medicine wheel, the red, the white, the black, and the yellow, we must all come together to create a good path forward so that we treat each other with kindness and respect and love. We're not so different. We've been told we are, but if we take the time to sit with each other, we will find we are much alike. So I urge you to do that as you move forward, to sit with someone you don't know and ask, who are they? And find out more about them. And you will soon find that they are much like you. They are not different. They may have different ways of believing and different thoughts and different ways of doing something, but the purpose is there, to come together, to live in unity, to be kind, and for each person to get their needs met. So please remember that as you move forward. We ask those ancestors to go back to where they sit and wait till we call on them again, and we make that promise to those little ones that are yet to come, that we will work to the best of our abilities to make this space a kind and loving, caring place for those little ones that are yet to be here. Don't forget, we're at the anniversary of finding 215 small babies in those places that they were forgotten about. We're at that anniversary. Remember all those who have lost their lives to violence, those that are currently in the hospitals and institutions that don't have access to the same things that we have. Remember to pray for those in whatever way you pray, because prayer can make a big change that we cannot make as humans. No matter who you pray to, there is one stronger than us. There is one greater than us. And we must incorporate our spirituality, our religious understandings, to know that sometimes we do all we can and things don't happen. But through prayer, all things are possible. So, Chimigwich, get home safely to your loved ones, to your family, to your friends, to your communities. And until we meet again, we don't say goodbye, we say bamapi, until I see you again. Thank you.